The storm had been threatening since noon, the kind that doesn't bring rain, only wind dust and a taste of copper on the tongue. By sundown, the horizon burned like the rim of a forge, and every nail in the old porch creaked as if it too wanted to scream. Mabel Yazzie stood barefoot on the warped planks, her heavy frame silhouetted against the dying sun. Her palms were coated in blue cornmeal from the dough she'd left on the kitchen table. The smell of yeast and smoke drifted from the wood stove behind her. But she didn't move. She didn't blink. She just watched the man she'd once loved, Caleb Monroe, loading the last of his belongings onto a wagon that wasn't even his. Her wagon. The mule stamped its hooves, impatient. Caleb didn't look at her, didn't offer a word or even a glance as he cinched the rope around a trunk she'd once kept linens in. The woman waiting in the wagon, a pale-skinned stranger draped in green silk, tipped her hat forward, shielding her face. Still, Mabel could feel the curve of the woman's smile. That kind of smile only a winner wears. The air felt thick, ready to split open. "You're leaving, Caleb." Mabel said, her voice low but steady, carried by the dry wind. "Not just the house. You're leaving the kind of woman most men never deserve." He froze for half a breath. Just half. Then he kept walking. Mabel waited for an answer that didn't come. Instead, Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled something small and metallic. The wedding ring caught the last ray of the sun before it dropped from his fingers, hitting the porch floorboards with a sound like a pistol shot. Clink. That was it. No apology. No farewell. Caleb swung himself up into the wagon, took the reins, and with a whip crack, the mule lurched forward. The wagon rolled away, trailing dust that swallowed his shadow whole. And Mabel stood there, the wind tugging at her long skirt, the weight of the ring's echo settling deep inside her chest. Inside the house, the dough had risen too much. She punched it down hard, her thick hands sinking into the warm mass, the rhythm matching the beat of her heart. "He's gone," she told herself. "He's really gone." Outside, coyotes began their nightly wails. Enola, her 12-year-old niece, stirred on the cot by the wall. "Is he coming back?" "Aunt Mabel," the girl mumbled, still half asleep. Mabel didn't answer at first. She tore a piece of dough, shaped it, set it on the pan. "No," she said finally. "And that's all right." The words didn't sound like forgiveness, more like survival. The next morning, the town already knew. They always knew. Two women at the well stopped their chatter when Mabel approached. One gave her a look that was meant to be sympathy, but landed like pity. The other smirked, whispering, "Heard he went north with that fancy widow. Guess Mabel's cooking couldn't hold him." Mabel didn't flinch. She filled her bucket, lifted it, and walked home without a word. But every step felt heavier. At noon, Sarah Bell came. The green silk woman, only the silk was gone now, replaced by dust and regret. Her hair was tangled, her eyes rimmed red. She stood at Mabel's gate like a ghost who'd lost its haunting rights. "Mabel," she began, voice brittle. Caleb, he took my money, my horse, everything. I don't know where he's gone." Mabel leaned against the porch post, the one Caleb had carved their initials into years ago. The letters were still there, worn and shallow. "You'll find him," she said. "Or maybe you won't. Either way, you'll live." Sarah's throat tightened. "You're not angry." Mabel gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Anger takes energy. I spent mine already." Sarah left, head bowed. The wind picked up behind her, scattering dry leaves across the yard like tiny brown ghosts. By late afternoon, Mabel was back in the field checking the corn rows. The ground cracked beneath her boots. The sun branded the back of her neck. Sweat rolled down her temples, cutting pale tracks through the dust on her skin. Her thoughts drifted uninvited to Caleb, to the way his voice used to fill a room, the way he used to dream of gold mines and cattle trails. Always something more, something bigger. He'd said once, "You and this land, Mabel, you'll keep me small." He was right. She had kept him small. But small things survive droughts. Big ones don't. That night, thunder rolled across the mesas, no rain yet, just warning. Mabel sat on the porch again, the same spot where he'd left her. The ring still lay where it fell. She hadn't picked it up. From the shadows of the doorway, Enola watched her. The child's eyes were too old for her face. Aunt Mabel turned slightly, her voice softer now. "Yes, baby, are we poor now?" Mabel looked out at the stretch of land, dry, stubborn, but hers. "No," she said. "We got dirt chickens and each other. That's enough." Enola nodded, satisfied with an answer only a child could find simple. She went back inside. Mabel stayed. The wind whistled through the boards, whispering things it had whispered for generations. She finally bent down, picked up the ring, and turned it in her palm. It wasn't heavy anymore. By dawn, the horizon glowed purple. Mabel had already kneaded new dough, fed the hens, and boiled coffee thick as tar. Routine her armor. When she stepped outside, a shadow broke the line of light in the east. A man on horseback, moving slow. Not Caleb. Too tall. Too steady. As he drew closer, she saw his face, tan skin, dark braids, a calmness that didn't belong to strangers. He dismounted near the fence, hat in hand. "Morning," he said. His voice was low, quiet, but sure. "Morning," Mabel replied, cautious. "I'm Jonas Big A," he continued. "I just came back. My aunt left me some land nearby. Don't know where the borders run, though." Mabel squinted against the glare. "The arroyo's your line, east of the mesquite trees. If you follow the dry wash, you'll find where it ends." Jonas nodded, respectful. "Appreciate it." He hesitated, eyes flicking toward her porch to the faint glint of metal lying there. "You all right, ma'am?" Mabel stiffened. "Fine." He nodded again, sensing the edge in her tone. "Then I'll see you around." As he mounted his horse and turned toward the ridge, Enola's voice called from the door. Who was that Aunt Mabel? "Just a neighbor," she said. But she watched him ride until he was a speck on the horizon. The storm finally broke, that night wind howling, lightning clawing at the sky. The first drops of rain hit the porch, sizzling on the dry wood. Mabel sat by the window, the ring on the table beside her cup. The air smelled of wet dust and the faintest trace of hope. She whispered into the thunder, not sure who she was talking to. "Maybe the land's got plans for me yet." Outside, the rain turned steady, softening the hard earth. The next morning, the rain was gone, but the footprints of the horse remained by the fence. Mabel's eyes followed them, half curious, half afraid. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Jonas Begay was still out there. Another wanderer, another test of how much the heart could rebuild. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the dampness of the earth and the heaviness in Mabel's chest. She stood at the edge of the field, where water still clung to the roots of the chili plants. The morning sun hadn't yet burned off the night's chill, and for a brief moment, everything felt still, like the land was holding its breath. Behind her, Enola skipped between puddles in her bare feet, humming an old lullaby their grandmother used to sing. Mabel watched her quietly, her heart tugging with a strange blend of gratitude and dread. They were alone now. Not in the left-behind kind of way, in the real kind. At the well later that morning, Mabel felt the stairs before she saw them. Two women were drawing water neighbors, though the word barely applied in a place where land stretched so far you could scream and no one would answer. One was Missy Tomlin, whose husband used to gamble with Caleb. The other Joyce from the dry goods store, always with a handkerchief full of other people's business. When they spotted Mabel, their conversation paused mid-sentence. Their glances flicked sideways like coyotes sniffing something fresh. Mabel didn't stop. She grabbed the handle of the well pump, working it with the same calm she always had. Missy leaned in to whisper too loud to be polite. "I heard he left with the widow in green. Some say she's got land all the way to Santa Fe." Joyce smirked. Guess Mabel's cooking wasn't enough to keep him rooted. Mabel kept pumping. Water splashed into the tin bucket loud and sharp. When it was full, she lifted it without meeting their eyes. Her back stayed straight, her face unreadable. As she turned to walk away, she spoke just loud enough. "Men leave, but women, we stay, we patch, we feed, we carry." Neither woman said another word. Back at the house, Enola was setting the table. The girl had tried to scrub the rust off the knives with ashes, just like she'd seen her aunt do. "I saved the last peach for you," she said, placing it in the center of the plate. Mabel gave her a small nod. She sat down, her knees aching from years of work, and took the peach gently in her hands. Its skin was bruised but still sweet, like everything that remained. "You did good," she told Enola. "Real good." They ate in silence, save for the occasional scrape of the fork or the clink of tin. Afterward, Enola asked, "Will you ever get married again?" Mabel's hand paused over her cup. "Why do you ask that?" I heard Missy say, "No man wants a woman who stays fat after the wedding." Mabel set the cup down. She reached across the table, took Enola's small hand. "People like to talk, 'cause talking's easier than doing. But what they don't understand, baby, is strength don't always look skinny." Enola tilted her head. "So, maybe a man could still love you." Mabel smiled, a little sad. "Maybe. But I'm not waiting on one to eat breakfast." In the afternoon, Mabel walked the perimeter of the field again. Her hands were calloused, the lines in her palms thick like dried rivers. She carried a hatchet in one hand, not for danger, but for the stubborn root of a mesquite bush that kept growing back by the fence. She was halfway through clearing it when she heard hooves. Slow. Steady. She turned and saw him again, Jonas Begay, the man with the soft eyes and worn boots. He pulled his horse to a stop just beyond the fence line. "You were right," he called. "The arroyo runs just like you said." Mabel nodded. "Told you it would. Water remembers." Jonas dismounted. He walked the fence, inspecting the rotted post at the corner. "You ever fix this one? Been meaning to." He squatted, ran a hand over the cracked wood. "I've got cedar back at the cabin. Maybe I'll bring you a piece." Mabel looked at him, brow raised. "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "Neighborly thing." She crossed her arms. "I'm not looking for help. I'm not offering charity," he said. "Just wood." She studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "All right, then." Jonas mounted again, tipping his hat. "See you around, Mabel." She watched him go, the way his shoulders sat square in the saddle, calm as a man who'd never needed to prove anything. That evening, as the light went golden across the porch, Mabel sat on the steps with a bowl of beans in her lap. Enola curled beside her head, resting on her thigh. "You think he'll come back?" the girl asked, not specifying who. Mabel didn't answer right away. She watched a hawk circling overhead. Some people come back when they've lost everything, she said. Others stay because they've already found it. Enola blinked slowly, digesting that. Jonas is different. Mabel's lips twitched. Don't go getting ideas. I'm not, Enola said. I just think he doesn't look at you like other men do. Mabel traced the rim of her bowl with her thumb. You watch too much. You don't watch enough, Enola whispered. That night Mabel couldn't sleep. Not because of grief. That had settled into her bones a long time ago. But something was stirring. Not longing. Not desire. Something quieter. Like the first hint of a breeze before the rain. She stood and walked to the window. The moon was high, casting silver light across the ridge. In the distance, she could see the faint silhouette of Jonas's cabin. A single lantern burned there, flickering. Maybe the land was trying to give her a second chance. Not at love, she wasn't naive enough to wish for that. But maybe peace. She closed the curtain slowly, went back to bed, and for the first time in a long while she dreamed not of what was lost, but of what might still be found. At dawn, the sound of hammering echoed faintly from beyond the arroyo. Jonas was already working cedar posts lined up like soldiers waiting for purpose. Mabel stood at the edge of her land, arms folded, watching him without moving closer. But she didn't turn away either. The hammering started just after sunrise. Not frantic, not rushed. A rhythm steady and grounded like a man who knew the value of taking his time. Mabel stood by the corner of her garden, hand on her hip, watching the ridgeline where Jonas's cabin sat. From this distance he was just a shape hat, low arms, working breath, parting the cool morning air. The new cedar posts gleamed pale against the earth, not yet weathered by wind or time. She wiped sweat from her brow, even though the sun wasn't fully up yet. There was no real reason to stare that long, no practical excuse. But she didn't move. Inside the house, Enola poked her head out the window. He's building fast, she said. Mabel grunted. The girl narrowed her eyes. He's building like he's staying. That's his business, Mabel replied without looking. But you're watching like it's yours. Mabel turned just enough to shoot her a look. Enola ducked back inside, giggling. Later that morning, Mabel made the walk down to the general store. The trail was dusty, but the sky above was a perfect stretch of blue, unmarred and endless. The wind carried the faint scent of mesquite smoke, and somewhere in the distance a wind chime clinked like a memory. Inside the store, old Don Avery was bent over a ledger, glasses perched halfway down his nose. He looked up and gave her a polite nod. Mabel. Don, she said. I need nails. Medium. And if you've got fresh lard, I'll take a pound. Someone fixin' to build, he asked, scratching at his temple. Mabel didn't answer. He smirked, but didn't press. Back row, third shelf. She grabbed what she needed and was headed to the counter when the door opened behind her and the temperature in the room shifted like a pulled thread. Jonas. He walked in with a quiet gate hat in hand, face shadowed, but open. His eyes met Mabel's, and he gave her a small nod. Morning, he said. She nodded back. Morning. Don cleared his throat loudly. Look at this. Two folks who know how to build things. You two ought to be in business. Neither answered. Mabel set her goods on the counter. Jonas added a coil of rope and a small tin of coffee to her pile. She frowned. That's not mine. I know, he said. It's mine. But we'll carry it together. She stared at him for a long moment, but he didn't flinch. They walked back in silence, each holding part of the load. The sun was higher now, casting sharp shadows beneath the cedar trees. Halfway down the path, Jonas slowed. "I've been meaning to ask." She raised an eyebrow. He pointed to the dry wash just off the trail. "You said that arroyo marks the border. How far east does it run, past the two leaning rocks? Then cuts back south?" He nodded thoughtfully. "I'm not here to fix anything," he said after a pause. "I just want to know where the river runs." She stopped walking. The air between them stilled. "Don't talk pretty at me, Jonas Begay," she said. "I've had enough of men with silver tongues and broken promises." "I'm not good at pretty," he said. "Just honest." That answer sat between them like a warm, stone-solid, simple, impossible to ignore. They walked on. By the time they reached the fence line between their lands, Enola was waiting, arms crossed, face full of questions she wasn't quite brave enough to ask. "You two building a church or something?" she asked. Jonas chuckled. "Just a fence. Less divine. More splinters." Mabel swatted at the girl's shoulder. "Go feed the chickens." Enola scurried off, still grinning. Jonas moved to the broken post and began to measure. "You've got good bones on this land." Mabel stood nearby, arms crossed. "Good bones don't mean much if no one helps keep the roof on. I'm not here to patch your roof." "Then what are you here for?" Jonas drove the new post into the ground with a single heavy strike. Then he looked up, sweat on his brow, eyes steady. "I'm here because this land called me home. Maybe not the same way it calls you. But it called just the same." She didn't respond right away. She watched the dust settle around his boots, watched the way he didn't look away. "Maybe the land doesn't care if we're ready," she said finally. "It just waits." "Like you?" he asked gently. She blinked, the words cutting deeper than expected. "I'm not waiting," she said. "I'm working." He smiled, not mockingly, not sweetly, just real. "You're the hardest working woman I've ever met." She looked down at her thick hands, at the calluses and scars. "And still," she said, "folks only see what left." He reached over, not touching her, just pointing to the post they'd just sunk together. "Well," he said, "I see what stayed." That night, Mabel sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. She hadn't lit the lantern. The moon was enough. Enola came out and sat beside her, legs tucked under. "Do you like him?" she asked. Mabel didn't answer right away. "I don't know yet. But you don't mind when he's around?" "No," Mabel said. "I don't mind." Enola smiled, and for a moment they both just breathed. The porch creaked as the night wind moved across it. Before bed, Mabel stepped outside one last time. The stars overhead looked close enough to touch. From the ridge, the faint light of Jonas's lantern still glowed. She wrapped her shawl tighter. "I'm not here to fix anything," she whispered into the dark. "But maybe I want to know where the river runs, too." She didn't realize Enola was standing behind her until she spoke. "Aunt Mabel." "Yes, baby. You looked like you were praying just now." Mabel smiled. "Maybe I was." The next day, the post was set. The fence held. And Jonas brought more than just wood. He brought a proposal of work, of partnership, not the kind sealed with rings, but the kind that required sweat, shared tools, and the ability to show up day after day. A question formed on his lips as he approached her porch with his hat in his hands. And Mabel already knew she was going to say yes. Not because she needed help, but because it might be the first offer she could accept without feeling small. The air was cool enough to fool the skin, but the sun was already warming the topsoil, promising heat before noon. Mabel stepped over a sagging portion of the old fence boots, crunching through a bed of dried chamomile. She didn't have to turn her head to know Jonas was already out there. The thud of a post driver rang out steady, a beat like a heart. She found him crouched beside the arroyo, tracing the edge where the land cracked into a snaking cut of dry earth and thorn brush. "Found your border," he said, gesturing at a stone marker, barely visible beneath the dust. Mabel knelt beside him. Her skirt gathered dirt as she brushed it away with firm fingers, revealing a faint Navajo clan symbol chiseled into the face. Weather-worn, but still proud. "That's my grandfather's mark," she said quietly. Jonas nodded. "Your people carved it in stone. That's legacy." Mabel sat back on her heels and let her gaze follow the length of the arroyo as it curved and vanished toward the canyon ridge. "People think the land forgets," she said, "but it doesn't. It keeps every step, every voice, every name that ever laid claim to it." He was silent for a moment, watching her. Then he said, "Sometimes a river looks dry, but underneath it's just waiting to run again." She didn't reply, not right away, but she did smile. Barely. A flicker in the corner of her mouth that came and went like a breeze across a still pond. They spent the next few hours walking the full boundary line. Jonas carried a small notebook marking rough sketches of land corners and elevations. Mabel led, pointing out natural divides, a crooked juniper here, a break in the canyon wall there. He followed, never questioned. At one point she paused near a dead pinyon tree, its roots twisted out of the earth. "There was a spring here once, used to come up clean. Then a flash flood covered it in silt." "Still there, though," Jonas said. Mabel nodded. "Buried, but not gone." He gave her a sidelong look. "Like you." She didn't respond, just kept walking. By mid-morning, they reached the far side of the property, where a stand of cottonwoods bent low over the arroyo. The shade cooled their skin and quieted their steps. Birds chirped in the branches, and the dry wind whispered across their faces. Jonas sat against the largest tree, taking a swig from his canteen. "You ever think about selling?" he asked. Mabel raised a brow. "Selling what? This land? Starting over somewhere else?" She snorted. "And go where be? That big woman who got left behind somewhere new." He didn't flinch at her bitterness. "I meant somewhere that doesn't carry the weight of him." She leaned against the opposite tree, arms crossed. "I carry that weight, not this land. This place saw it all, and it stayed. Just like me." He stared off into the trees. "I used to move every 6 months. Couldn't sleep in a bed I'd built. Didn't trust any roof that didn't leak." Mabel looked over at him. "What changed?" He shrugged, still figuring that out. "But lately, I want something that needs fixing." She gave a short laugh. "You sure came to the right place then." He smiled. "I'm starting to think so." They cleared brush together through the afternoon. Mabel swung the hatchet like she'd been born holding one. Jonas cut vines with a hunting knife worn at the handle. The sweat on their foreheads wasn't from tension, it was from the kind of labor that felt like proof of worth. At one point she tripped over a buried root and stumbled. Jonas caught her elbow just before she hit the ground. "I said I'm fine," she muttered, straightening herself. "I didn't say you weren't," he replied, steady as ever. She wiped dirt from her skirt. "I don't need a hand." "I know," he said, "but I had one anyway." This time she didn't pull away so quickly. They stopped for lunch under a mesquite tree. Jonas unwrapped tortillas, beans, and a chunk of dried meat from waxcloth. Mabel brought pickled cactus from her apron pocket, wrapped in a small cloth. "Didn't know you had that," Jonas said, surprised. She shrugged. Didn't know if you'd bring enough for two. He smiled. I always do. She ate quietly, watching how he chewed, slow and deliberate. Not like Caleb, who always rushed as if someone might steal his plate. You chew like you ain't afraid to enjoy something, she said suddenly. Jonas glanced at her and then back at his food. Maybe I'm learning not to be. Mabel finished her cactus and leaned back against the tree, watching the light shift through the branches. Why'd you really come here, Jonas? My aunt passed. Left me land. I came for that. Land's not enough to keep a man, she said. He looked at her, then hard enough she almost looked away. No, he said. But maybe a reason to stay is. Later, back at her property line, they stopped by the post he'd helped set 2 weeks ago. The cedar still smelled faintly sharp fresh. Mabel leaned on it, wiping her brow. You've got a good place here, Jonas said. It's lonely, she replied. Doesn't have to be. She hesitated, then said, I'm not looking to fill a space just so it ain't empty. I'm not asking to be a placeholder, he said. She studied him. You want something real? He nodded. Eventually. I'm not there yet. I'll wait, he said simply. And something in her chest, something rusted and bolted down for years, shifted. That night, Mabel sat on the porch with Enola watching fireflies drift between the trees. He's different, Enola said without preamble. Mabel didn't deny it. You like him. Don't know him well enough. Enola looked up at the stars. That's what you said about Uncle Caleb, too. Mabel blinked. What, you said you didn't know Caleb well enough when he asked you to marry him, but you said yes anyway. The silence stretched. I'm not that woman anymore, Mabel said softly. Enola leaned her head on Mabel's arm. I know. At dawn, Jonas showed up again. No big speech, no roses, just a rolled-up blueprint and a bag of nails. I've got an idea, he said, holding out the sketch. Might be faster if we build together. Mabel took the paper, her thick fingers brushing his. No promises, she said. Just foundations, he answered. She stepped off the porch and nodded toward the field. All right, let's start digging. In the distance, clouds were building again, low and heavy with rain. But this time, Mabel didn't brace for a storm. She started walking toward it. By the end of the week, the rhythm of working together had settled into something unspoken. Mabel and Jonas shared the land between their properties like it was an old conversation, quiet, constant, necessary. Every morning, Jonas brought tools and lumber. Mabel brought breakfast wrapped in cloth. By noon, they'd be knee-deep in cedar dust or bent over tangled roots, barely speaking, yet never uncomfortable in the silence. It was late afternoon when Mabel stood on the half-built fence hammer in one hand, squinting against the sun. The sweat ran down her spine in slow, determined rivulets, and the knot in her back from swinging the axe hadn't loosened in days. Still, she kept going. Behind her, Jonas was measuring distance between two posts, his eyes focused, his hands steady. He worked like the land was something holy. You measure everything twice, Mabel said, wiping her brow. Only the things that matter, he replied. She looked down at the post. That one's crooked. Jonas tilted his head, then smiled. That's not crooked. That's character. She shook her head but didn't argue. The air was heavy with late summer heat, and the flies were relentless. Mabel swatted at one buzzing near her ear. We should have done this in spring. We didn't know each other in spring. She paused, then nodded. Fair. He passed her a new nail, and their fingers brushed. It was nothing. But it was also something. Around dusk, they broke for dinner. Mabel laid out cornbread and a jar of pickled beans under the mesquite tree. Jonas unpacked smoked meat and coffee brewed thick enough to chew. They didn't sit too close, but they didn't sit far either. Enola showed up halfway through her dress, stained with berry juice, her arms full of wildflowers. "I brought decorations," she said with a flourish, dropping them onto the stump they were using as a table. Jonas laughed, a sound so rare Mabel forgot how warm it could be. "You should get paid extra for morale," he said to Enola. "I'll take pie," she replied. Mabel swatted at her with a smile. "You don't even like pie." "Doesn't mean I won't take it." Enola turned to Jonas, eyes sharp as ever. "You staying for supper?" "Didn't plan to." "Then you don't plan well." He raised a brow. "You always this bossy." "She gets it from me," Mabel said before Enola could. The girl grinned and ran off, flowers trailing behind her. Jonas leaned back against the tree. "You two ever slow down only when we're sleeping. And even then, I've got one ear open. Can't blame you." She looked over at him, eyes narrowing. "What are you really doing here, Jonas? You fixin' to build something permanent?" He didn't answer right away, just sipped his coffee. Then he looked her square in the eye and said, "If you need help, just say it. If you don't, I'll still be here." It stopped her cold. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Not as a question. Not as a favor. Just fact. The kind of offer you couldn't buy. The kind that had no debt attached. She stood abruptly. "Fence won't finish itself." He rose, too silent, but his gaze lingered. Later, while hammering the last post of the day, Mabel missed the nail entirely and struck her thumb. The sound cracked sharp in the air, followed by her hiss of pain. Jonas was beside her before she could curse. "Let me see." "I'm fine. You said that yesterday when you burned your wrist." "I was fine yesterday." And today she held out her hand, muttering. He took it gently, inspecting the swelling thumb. His hands were rough warm. His touch careful. "You need to wrap this," he said. "Give it a day to rest." "I don't rest." He met her gaze. "Maybe that's your problem." She glared. "And maybe you talk too much." He grinned. "Could be both." By the time they finished, the stars were starting to peek through the deepening blue above. The air had cooled just enough to make Mabel wish she'd brought a shawl. They stood by the fence line, watching the shadows stretch. "You ever think this might be too much land for just one set of hands?" Jonas asked. She didn't answer, because she had. Plenty of times. But she wouldn't admit it out loud. Not yet. As they gathered tools, a figure appeared on the path up ahead, tall, lean, moving with the loose swagger of someone who thought they still mattered. Sarah Bell. Hair-down dress, wrinkled eyes sharp and scanning. "Well, well," she drawled. "Looks like I found the missing lumberjack." Mabel stiffened. Jonas wiped his brow but didn't smile. "Evening, Sarah." "I didn't expect to see you two so cozy," she said, glancing at Mabel. "Didn't peg you as the jealous type, Mabel." "I'm not," Mabel said flatly. Sarah raised a brow. "Good. Because he and I go back, don't we, Jonas?" Jonas met her eyes. "We don't go anywhere anymore." Sarah's lips curled. "You always had a way of pretending feelings were facts. Not pretending now." Sarah turned toward Mabel. "He's got a past. Just like Caleb. Maybe worse. Thought you ought to know." Mabel's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed even. "Difference is Caleb ran from me. Jonas walked toward me." That landed harder than Sarah expected. She stepped back, masking her expression. "Just looking out for you, sugar." I don't need looking after." Sarah smiled tightly, then left the way she came. When she was gone, Jonas turned to Mabel. "You believe her, I don't have to," Mabel said. "You're not the one I need to worry about." Jonas looked relieved, but said nothing. That night, Enola sat on the porch watching Mabel brush her hair. "She's pretty," the girl said. "Like a fox," Mabel replied. "You still trust him, I don't trust Easy." But Mabel tied back her braid tight and low. "But he's not asking me to." In the darkness of her room, Mabel lay awake, the image of Sarah's smile flickering in her mind. But stronger than that was the memory of Jonas's hand on hers. Gentle, solid, no promises, just presence. The next day he showed up with a busted fence rail from her side. "I'll fix it," he said. "I didn't ask." "I know," he replied. "But we're neighbors, and neighbors help." Mabel handed him a nail. "That all you are, Jonas, a neighbor?" He looked up, sun in his eyes. "For now," he said, and kept working. The heat came early that morning, riding the light like a warning. The sky over the mesa glowed white, and the wind carried dust instead of relief. Mabel had already hauled 2 buckets of water from the well before Jonas even appeared, his shirt soaked through hat pulled low. She handed him a tin cup without a word. He drank, wiped his mouth, then nodded at the fence. "We're losing daylight. We're also losing our minds building in this heat," she replied. He smiled. "Don't worry. You're still the sharp one." They worked side by side in a silence that had grown easier familiar. Every swing of the hammer, every set of boots in the dirt, it had rhythm, now a flow that didn't need narration, until it broke. Around midday, just as they reached the new row of posts by the western edge, the sound of hoofbeats cracked across the valley like distant thunder. Mabel's spine stiffened. She turned slowly, squinting into the horizon. A horse and rider, moving fast, and heading straight for them. Jonas stepped forward, body instinctively tensing. Mabel narrowed her eyes. "You recognize the horse?" Jonas didn't answer right away. Then he said low and certain, "Yeah, I do." The rider pulled up hard just a few yards from them. A tall man, lean like wind-stripped wood with a jagged scar running down the side of his neck. His horse snorted, kicking up red dust as it came to a stop. "Mabel," he said, tipping his hat with a dry smile. "Jonas." Mabel didn't respond. Jonas stepped slightly in front of her. "Didn't expect to see you, Ray." Ray chuckled, slow and mean. "Life's full of surprises." "Ain't that right, Mabel?" She crossed her arms. "What do you want?" "I heard there's good land out here." "Fenced land. Shared land." Jonas's jaw flexed. "This is Navajo land. Ain't for sale." Ray's grin widened. "I didn't say anything about buying." The tension thickened like heat rising off iron. Mabel could smell the whiskey on Ray, even from where she stood. "You should turn around," she said. "Ain't nothing here for you." Ray's eyes flicked to Jonas. "Seems to me there's more here than I thought." "Keep talking like that," Jonas said, voice calm, "and you'll find out just how wrong you are." Ray laughed, the sound hollow. Then he turned his horse with a jerk and galloped off in a spray of dust. As the silence returned, Mabel exhaled sharply. "You gonna tell me who that was?" she asked. Jonas looked down at his boots. "Ray was like a brother once. We ran cattle, stole some too. Rode through towns we had no right being in. And now he's poison." Mabel didn't move. "He left me for dead once. Got me caught, took off with the horses." She looked at him a long time. "You done with that life?" Jonas's eyes didn't flinch. "Every mile I walk away from it, I try to make sure I don't turn back." That evening, they finished the Western Line in silence. Enola brought them lemonade and lingered nearby, sensing something had shifted. Mabel noticed how Jonas's shoulders stayed a little tighter, how his gaze wandered more often toward the horizon. "You think he'll come back?" she asked quietly. Jonas nodded. "Yeah. Men like Ray don't ride in just to say hello." Enola's eyes darkened. "Is he dangerous?" Jonas looked at the girl. "He's trouble. But you've got good walls. And better people." The next day, Ray returned. Not on horseback this time, but on foot from the south trail where the land dips behind the canyon curve. Mabel saw him before Jonas did. She was hanging laundry when the shadow appeared at the edge of her property. Ray didn't speak. He just stood, arms crossed, watching the fabric flap like warning flags. She walked out to meet him unarmed. "I don't like you here," she said plainly. Ray smirked. "Good thing I ain't here for your approval. You looking to settle old scores, number just old debts, then go settle 'em somewhere else." His smile vanished. "This ain't about you, Mabel. This is about him. And if you're standing in the way—" "I'm not standing in front of him," she said. "I'm standing beside him." That gave Ray pause, long enough for Jonas to appear on the ridge above, rifle slung casually across his back. Ray looked up at him. Jonas didn't raise the weapon. He didn't need to. "Turn around," he called down. Ray glanced once more at Mabel, then spit in the dirt and walked off. That night, Mabel paced the floor of her kitchen, while Enola watched her from the table stirring the pot of beans without really looking. "He's not going away," Mabel muttered. "No," Enola said. "But neither are we." Mabel stopped pacing, looked at the girl. "You scared?" Enola's eyes were steady. "Not of him. I'm scared you'll push Jonas away because of him." Mabel sighed. "This ain't about fear. It's about not inviting ghosts into your house." "But sometimes," Enola said, "ghosts follow us anyway, even if we lock the doors." Mabel didn't say anything for a long time. Then she sat down across from her and nodded. "You sound older than me sometimes. I've lived with you long enough." The next day, Jonas helped repair the chicken coop after a coyote tore through it during the night. His hands were quick, his face distracted. Mabel handed him nails, watching him closely. "You think he'll come back again?" she asked. "He's already here," Jonas said. "He just hasn't decided how he wants to act." "What would you do if I told you not to get involved?" He looked up. "I'd listen, but I wouldn't leave." Mabel's eyes met his. "I don't want another man who runs when things get hard." "Then you've got the right man," he said. "Because I ran long enough." By sunset, the repairs were done. The coop held. The fences stood firm. Jonas sat on the porch steps beside Mabel, the first chill of evening settling in. "You sure you want me here?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then slow and clear she said, "I'd rather fight beside you than hide without you." He turned toward her, his face unreadable. "That's the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me," he whispered. She looked at him. "It's not kindness. It's truth." And truth, Mabel knew, was the only thing strong enough to face what was coming next. Because the land had been claimed. The roots were settling. And the past, it was already riding toward them. The morning came with a silence too heavy to be ordinary. Not even the birds dared to sing. Mabel stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hand, watching the trail that wound down from the southern ridge like it might spit something out of the past any second. Enola was still asleep upstairs, and Jonas hadn't shown up yet. The quiet buzzed in her ears. A knock at the door broke it. She opened it slow, half expecting a ghost. But it was Jonas, hat in hand, a stiffness in his stance she hadn't seen before. "There's been movement on the north side," he said. "Tracks, boot prints. Too many to be a traveler." Mabel's jaw tightened. "You think it's him? I know it is." She let him inside and shut the door. He didn't sit, just stood near the window, eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk. Mabel sipped her coffee and broke the silence. "I want to end this before it begins." Jonas looked at her. "There's no clean way to end this. Not when a man like Ray's involved." "I don't care if it's clean," she said. "I care if it's final." He met her eyes, something fierce and deeply human in his stare. "You don't have to fight him alone." "I'm not," she said. "Not anymore." By midday, they'd ridden out past the fence line along the high ridge that overlooked the canyon basin. Mabel hadn't ridden in years, but she mounted her old mare with the ease of someone who never forgot how. Jonas rode just behind her, a rifle strapped across his back, but his hands light on the reins. No threat, just readiness. They found the prints easy enough. 4 sets of boots, deep careless, not bothering to hide. "They're camped close," Jonas said, crouching to examine the crushed sage. Mabel looked toward the canyon. "You think he brought others? Men like Ray always bring others. Trouble's louder in groups." She frowned. "Then we need to make our stand now." He straightened and looked at her. "You sure?" She took a breath, slow and heavy. "There's no such thing as peace without risk." That night they sat by a fire behind the barn. The stars were out in full force, dusted across the black sky like ash. Jonas was sharpening his knife while Mabel cleaned her old shotgun, the one she hadn't touched since Caleb left. Enola sat beside them, watching both with wide, quiet eyes. "You ever shot that thing?" she asked, nodding at Mabel's shotgun. "Only once," Mabel said. "That was enough." "Did you hit what you aimed at?" "No," Mabel said with a faint smile. "But he never bothered me again." Jonas chuckled under his breath. Enola looked between them. "What if he doesn't come tonight?" "Then we wait," Jonas said. Mabel added, "But we don't stop preparing." The fire popped and cracked. Mabel reached out and threw another piece of mesquite on it. "I used to think strength was something loud," she said, mostly to herself. "Now I think it's just not backing down." Jonas looked at her, eyes steady. "You've been strong longer than most men ever bother to be." The attack came just after midnight. The horses whinnied, first alert and panicked. Then the flash of movement shadows cutting across the barnyard. 4 men, just like Jonas predicted. Ray led them, face covered with a red kerchief, revolver in hand. The others fanned out, moving toward the house. But Mabel and Jonas were already outside, standing their ground under the open stars. Jonas raised his voice. "That's close enough." Ray stopped chuckling. "You always did know how to ruin an entrance." Jonas kept his rifle aimed. "You got 2 choices. Turn around or get buried. You think you scare me, brother. I'm not your brother." Ray pulled the kerchief down and smiled. "No, but we used to bleed the same." Mabel stepped forward, then her shotgun resting against her hip like it belonged there. "This is my land," she said. "You trespass here again, you won't leave." Ray glanced at her, then back at Jonas. "You let her talk for you now," Jonas replied. "She doesn't speak for me. She speaks for herself." Ray's eyes narrowed. "Last chance." Mabel cocked the shotgun, the sound sharp in the still night. "So's yours." The standoff hung for seconds that stretched like rope. Then one of Ray's men twitched. The shot rang out before he could lift his weapon. Jonas fired clean, dropping the man to the ground with a shout. The yard erupted. Gunfire cracked through the dark like thunder. Mabel fired once, missed, but the sound scattered one of the men back into the brush. Enola, safe inside the root cellar like they planned, could be heard screaming for Mabel to be careful. Jonas moved like water, clean, efficient. He dropped a second man and turned just as Ray charged him with a blade. They collided hard. Both weapons dropped. The knife flashed, catching Jonas's shoulder. He grunted, but didn't fall. Mabel raised her shotgun, aimed at Ray. He turned, snarling. "You ain't got the guts!" She held steady. Ray lunged. The gun fired. He hit the dirt body, twisted, breath gone. Jonas slumped beside the barn wall, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. Mabel ran to him, dropping the shotgun. "You still breathing?" "Not well," he said, wincing. "Good," she muttered. "Means I don't have to drag your sorry ass." By dawn, it was over. 2 of Ray's men had fled. Ray was dead, and the yard smelled like gunpowder and blood. Mabel sat on the porch steps, shotgun resting beside her, watching the sun rise like nothing had changed. But everything had. Jonas came out with his arm in a sling, patched up as best she could. He sat beside her without asking. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Mabel broke the quiet. "I never wanted a fight. I know. But I wasn't going to let him take this." He nodded slowly. "I'd follow you into any fire, Mabel." She looked at him. "You already did." He gave a crooked smile. "Guess I'm yours now." She stared ahead at the horizon, where the light was growing stronger. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I mean it." She reached down and took his hand, dirt and all. "I ain't afraid of ghosts anymore," she said. He squeezed her fingers. "You shouldn't be," he said, "because now they answer to you." And the land at last felt quiet again, not because nothing stirred, but because what needed to be faced had been. The blood had dried into the earth by the time the sun cleared the ridgeline. A red-brown stain just outside the barn, like the land itself had opened up and swallowed what didn't belong. Mabel stood over it with a bucket of water and a stiff, bristled brush, scrubbing in steady, silent circles. Jonas wasn't supposed to be out of bed, but she heard his boots anyway. "You should be resting," she said without looking up. He leaned against the fence post, arm in a sling. "That's rich, coming from a woman who got thrown into a gunfight and started her day by scrubbing blood out of dirt." She stopped, wiped her brow. "Some things don't belong here. That includes stains." Jonas watched her for a moment. "You're not cleaning because of blood. You're cleaning because of what it meant." She looked up at him, towered. "That man walked onto my land thinking he could take whatever he wanted. And you showed him otherwise." Mabel stood slowly, knees aching. "Yeah, but I don't want to become the kind of person who starts believing blood is the price of peace." Jonas didn't argue. He just reached out with his good arm and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You haven't. You chose to protect what's yours. That's not violence. That's love with a backbone." The next few days moved slow, heavy with recovery. Enola helped patch Jonas's shoulder with poultices Mabel had learned from her mother. The girl tried to act like it didn't scare her, but she hovered close, asking more questions than usual. "Will the scar stay?" she asked one morning as she dabbed the wound. Jonas winced. "Probably," good Enola said. "Then you won't forget." Mabel chuckled from across the room, as if he could forget a night like that. Enola raised a brow. "You haven't forgotten yours, have you?" Mabel looked away. No, she said. Some nights don't leave. They just get quieter. By the end of the week, the sheriff rode out to the homestead. Sheriff Corbin was an older Navajo man, slow-moving, but sharp-eyed. He'd known Mabel's father, and he greeted her like a neighbor, not an officer. I got word from the postmaster, he said, about a skirmish. Man named Ray Fisher dead on your property. Mabel nodded. That's right. You got witnesses. She motioned to Jonas. He was there. Enola too, but she was inside. Corbin turned to Jonas. You fire the first shot, no sir. Jonas replied. I only fired after one of Ray's men raised a weapon. The sheriff scratched his chin. Sounds like self-defense. It was, Mabel said firmly. They came armed. They came fast. They didn't come to talk. Corbin looked around the yard. His gaze landed on the fence, the fresh posts, the bullet holes patched with hammered tin. You building something permanent here, Mabel, I'm trying to. Corbin nodded. Then you'll need more than fences. You'll need reputation. She didn't flinch. Let them talk. I'll keep standing. The sheriff tipped his hat. You've always been your father's daughter. I'll file the report clean. But know this, there'll be folks who won't like that a woman pulled a trigger and held her land. Mabel crossed her arms. Then they best stay off it. Corbin smiled. That's what I figured. After the sheriff left, Jonas walked with her to the creek behind the north pasture. The water ran low but steady, trickling through cottonwoods that whispered in the breeze. You ever think about leaving? He asked. I did, she said. Right after Caleb. Thought about it every night. Packing up, heading east, selling the land. Why didn't you? She looked at the creek, then at her own hands, dirt-streaked and calloused. Because this land knew my name even when he didn't. And now, it knows my story. Not just his. Jonas nodded. Then I guess it's time to write the next chapter. Mabel studied him. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to build more than fences with you. She didn't speak for a long moment. The only sound was the rustling of the trees. Then she said, quiet but firm. You sure about that? Because I come with baggage, regret, rage, a daughter who never stops asking questions. He smiled. Sounds like a full life. That evening, Mabel pulled out a folded, yellowing deed from her lockbox. She sat with Jonas at the kitchen table, Enola at the window, drawing flowers on the dusty glass. This deed's in my father's name, she said. I never got around to changing it. Jonas looked it over. It's good land. It's our land now, if you want it. He raised a brow. You offering to share it, I'm offering to build something honest, she said. But it starts with both of us putting names to paper. Not just promises. He reached across the table and took her hand. Then let's put it down in ink. Enola turned from the window. Does that mean we're staying? Mabel met her daughter's eyes. We've always been staying. Jonas grinned. Might need a bigger coop. Enola smirked. And a stronger door. Mabel laughed, the sound fuller than it had been in years. Later that night, she stood on the porch, arms folded, staring at the horizon. Jonas joined her, his arms still stiff but healing. Tomorrow, he said, we start planting. She nodded. You think the ground will take seed after everything? Jonas watched the stars. This land doesn't punish you for surviving, he said. It just waits for you to start living again. She looked at him. You really believe that? He turned to her. I have to. And in that moment, Mabel realized he wasn't just here because he'd been broken. He was here because he wanted to be whole, and maybe, just maybe, they could learn how to be whole together. The land was quiet that night, but not in fear, in peace, as if it too was ready for what came next. The plow broke halfway through the second row. Mabel cursed low under her breath, tugging the twisted metal from the sun-baked earth. Sweat clung to her brow. Her hands were blistered, calloused from weeks of work that seemed to pile up faster than it could be done. Jonas walked over from the barn, wiping grease from his fingers. He saw the busted blade and gave a low whistle. That old mule wasn't built for this kind of soil. She stood stretching her back. Neither was I, he grinned. But here you are. She didn't smile back. Not this time. Something's wrong, she muttered. The land's been turning different. Drier, even by our standards. Jonas crouched, ran his fingers through the powdery soil. It sifted like ash between his hands. You're right, he said. It's not holding water like before. Mabel looked at the sky, blue, wide, and cruelly empty. Not a cloud in sight. We need rain, she said. He stood beside her, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. We need faith first. She stared at him sharp. Faith don't plow rows or fill wells. Maybe not, he said, but it's what gets you up the next day to try again. She turned away. It's not just the land, she said quietly. It's everything. The chickens laid soft shells last week. The well's down 4 inches. And last night Enola asked if we'd have to move. Jonas frowned. What did you tell her? I told her no. But I didn't feel it when I said it. That night, Mabel couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, candlelight flickering, a map of the region spread out before her. Her finger traced the creeks, the ridges, the old riverbed that hadn't run in years. The wind pushed against the windows like a whisper. She wasn't sure if it was warning or memory. Jonas joined her quietly, a blanket over his shoulders. He didn't ask what she was doing. He just sat beside her. I keep thinking, she said, after a while, maybe this land's cursed. It's not, he said gently. Then why does it feel like we're always fighting it? Jonas tapped a point on the map. Because this land isn't gentle. But it's not against you either. It just makes you earn everything. Mabel looked at the calluses on her hands. I thought I had. Jonas reached over and slid a folded paper from his pocket. What's that? She asked. A letter from an old friend in Flagstaff. Says there's a machine that digs deeper wells, cheaper than hauling water all summer. You've been writing to people behind my back. I've been preparing. In case you said yes. Mabel hesitated. And what if I said no? He shrugged. Then I'd still be here. We'd figure it out. She looked at the letter again. Then she folded it and slid it into the map. The next day, Mabel and Jonas rode into town. It was their first trip together since the shootout. Folks watched from windows and doorways, some nodding respectfully, others whispering behind hands. At the hardware store, Mabel asked for irrigation pipes and sealant. The clerk, a pale man with a thin mustache, raised an eyebrow. Most folks are stocking up for drought, he said, not prepping for crops. Mabel met his gaze. Then most folks aren't planning to win. Jonas smirked behind her. They packed the wagon full, piping tarps, seed sacks, a hand pump, and rode back heavy. The sun bore down, but Mabel felt something stir under her skin. Not hope exactly. Not yet. But something close. Back at the homestead, Enola ran out to meet them. Her hair was tied back, apron dusted with flour. I made fry bread, she announced proudly. You missed the first round. We'll earn the second, Mabel said, climbing down. Enola peeked at the supplies. What's all this? Jonas grinned. Tools to wake the earth. Mabel added, if the rain won't come to us, we'll go to the water. That night, over hot fry bread and beans, they made a plan. Enola traced lines in the dirt floor with a stick, mimicking the irrigation channels they'd build. Will it work? She asked. Mabel looked at her, then at Jonas. We won't know until we try, she said. But doing nothing, that's what makes you lose. The days that followed were grueling. They dug from dawn to dusk, carving trenches from the well to the fields. Jonas, despite his healing shoulder, worked harder than anyone. Enola hauled buckets, fetched tools, learned the rhythm of labor without complaint. One afternoon, as Mabel drove the spade deep into the soil, she hit something solid. Jonas looked over. You strike a rock. She knelt, brushed the dirt away. Not rockwood. An old beam, rotted through. Part of something buried long ago. She pulled harder and uncovered more metal hinges, rusted nails, bits of charred leather. Jonas crouched beside her, frowning. That's part of an old wagon. Mabel sat back on her heels. My father used to talk about the day they almost left, right after the war. They packed everything and got as far as the ridge. But Mama wouldn't leave. Said the land wasn't finished with them. You think this was that wagon? I know it was. Jonas looked at her. And yet here you are. She stared at the broken timber, her voice soft. Sometimes the land doesn't give what you ask. It gives what you need. They buried the remains respectfully, then returned to the trenches. Mabel's back ached. Her knuckles were raw. But her spirit was no longer tired. That night, thunder cracked in the distance. She sat up straight on the porch, heart pounding. Jonas joined her, listening. You hear that? She asked. Been a while, he said. The smell came first, ozone and earth, then the breeze, cool, real, and finally the rain. It fell slow at first, then steady, then wild. Mabel stepped off the porch and let it soak her skin. Jonas stood behind her. This land, it doesn't hate us, he said. No, she whispered. It just wanted to see if we'd stay. She turned to him, soaked and shivering, but smiling wide. You asked me what faith was, she said. He nodded. She looked up at the clouds, tears lost in the rain. It's digging trenches before the storm. And that night, for the first time in a long time, the land drank. The morning after the rain, everything smelled different, richer, deeper. The scent of wet cedar, loosened clay, and something else that Mabel couldn't name. Like memory. Like beginning again. She stepped into the garden barefoot, the red mud squeezing between her toes. All around her, the land seemed to breathe. The soil, once cracked and brittle, now held promise in its weight. She knelt and touched it. It was still damp from the storm. Feels like it's listening, she murmured. Jonas came up behind her with 2 cups of coffee. His shirt clung to him from the humidity, and there was a tired ease in his eyes. I think it always was, he said. We just finally shut up long enough to hear it. She chuckled, taking one of the cups. Or maybe we yelled at it so loud, it finally rained, just to shut us up. Jonas sipped his coffee, smiling. Whatever works. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the way the land glistened under the rising sun. Puddles mirrored the sky. The fields shimmered like possibility. You ready to plant? Jonas asked. I was born ready, Mabel said. I just had to remember it. They spent the next 2 days laying down seed. Corn beans squash, what the elders called the 3 sisters. Mabel's mother had taught her the method once back when she still wore ribbons in her hair and called every storm a miracle. Now she passed that knowledge to Enola. "Why do the beans climb the corn?" the girl asked, dropping seeds into the warm soil. Mabel knelt beside her, pressing the mound down gently. "Because they need each other. The corn gives the beans something to hold on to. The squash spreads out and keeps the weeds away." Enola thought about that. "So they work together, exactly," Mabel said. "On their own, they'd struggle. But together, they thrive." She looked over at Jonas, who was fixing the irrigation pipe. And maybe that was the lesson the land had been trying to teach her all along. Word of the storm spread fast. Neighboring ranchers stopped by, curious to see if the homestead had survived. Most were surprised to see Mabel upright, the fields tilled, the crops already in. "You must have known the rain was coming," said an older woman named Mrs. Thistle with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "I didn't know," Mabel replied. "I just decided to act like it would." Another rancher, a young man with calloused hands, looked around the property. "Place looks different," he said. "More alive." Mabel nodded. "It is." He paused. "You think it'll hold? I think we will," she said. But not everyone was pleased. A week later, while Jonas and Mabel were checking the fence line, they found the creek dammed with rocks and branches, deliberate recent. The water had backed up, starving the irrigation channel. "Someone's trying to cut us off," Jonas muttered, kicking at the blockage. Mabel didn't flinch. "I've seen this before. Petty threats. Half-meant messages. Any idea who? Plenty of ideas. But no proof." They cleared the dam slowly, careful not to destroy the flow. As they worked, the water resumed its path, sluggish but moving. "It's not over, is it?" Jonas asked. Mabel wiped her hands. "Not by a long shot." Back at the house, Enola was waiting with worry in her eyes. "I heard something last night," she said. "By the barn." Jonas and Mabel exchanged a glance, like what Mabel asked. "Voices," Enola said. "A man. Maybe two." Jonas's voice was low. "Why didn't you wake us? You were already so tired," she said. "And I didn't want to believe it." Mabel crouched in front of her daughter. "Next time, believe it. Trust your gut." Enola nodded, serious. Jonas stood. "I'll sit out tonight. Keep watch." Mabel rose beside him. "We both will." They built a fire near the porch and sat through the night, wrapped in blankets, rifles close at hand. The wind carried the cries of distant coyotes, but otherwise the land was quiet. Too quiet. "I thought peace would feel easier," Mabel said. Jonas leaned back, looking at the stars. "Peace is just another kind of work. You always have a quote ready, only the ones that fit." She smiled faintly, then grew serious. "You think the land will forgive us for what we've taken from it? For what we did to keep it?" Jonas didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Maybe forgiveness isn't about what we did, but what we do next." Mabel looked out over the field, where sprouts had begun to break through. "Then we better do right by it." The next morning brought a gift. A basket of seeds and dried herbs left on the porch. No note. Just a feather tied with red twine. Mabel picked it up slowly, hands trembling. "It's from Clara," she whispered. Jonas looked at her confused. "The woman from the mesa." "She hasn't spoken to me since before Caleb left," Mabel said. "We had a falling out. She said I'd forgotten where I came from. And now she's saying I haven't." Jonas touched the feather. "She believes in what you're doing." Mabel held the basket to her chest. Then I can't stop. That afternoon, they invited the neighbors back, not just to show off the land, but to share it. Clara arrived late wearing a woven shawl and carrying a pot of something that smelled like memory and smoke. Mabel met her at the gate. Neither spoke at first. Then Clara said, "You were right to stay." Mabel replied, "You were right to wait." They embraced years of distance dissolving like dust in water. The evening became a feast. Bread baked in clay ovens, beans boiled in cast iron. Children ran wild and laughter filled the space where silence used to be. As the sun dipped low, Clara stood and raised her cup. "This land," she said, "was once taken from us. But tonight we take it back. Not with bullets, not with borders, but with roots, with sweat, with love." Mabel watched Jonas raise his cup in reply. Enola sat beside her, face glowing in the firelight. "I want to grow up here," she whispered. Mabel wrapped an arm around her. "You already are." Later, after the guests had gone and the coals had died down, Jonas and Mabel stood beneath the stars once more. She looked at the moonlit rows, the signs of green reaching up through the dirt. "It's working," she said. He nodded. "Because you believed it could." "No," she said. "Because we did." He slipped his hand into hers. "You said something a while back," he murmured, "about storms testing who we are." She remembered. "I think we passed," he added. Mabel looked at him, then out at the land. "We didn't just pass," she said. "We became who we were meant to be." And the wind moved through the cornfields like a quiet hymn whispering always forward. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. No return address. No seal. Just folded parchment in a dust-stained envelope slipped into the mailbox like a whisper. Mabel opened it with her fingers still gritty from the fields. Jonas stood behind her, watching her face as she read. She didn't blink, didn't speak, just held the letter like it might burn through her palm. Finally, she said, "It's from Caleb." Jonas's shoulders stiffened. Enola looked up from the porch steps where she was braiding grass. "Dad," Mabel turned to her, her voice tight. "He says he's coming back." Jonas stepped forward. When Mabel looked down at the last line scrawled hastily in the corner. 3 days. Says he wants to talk. Says he's changed. Jonas's face hardened. That's rich coming from a man who vanished. Mabel folded the letter slowly, methodically. "I don't know what he wants, but you're thinking of letting him in." She didn't answer. That was answer enough. For the rest of the day, Mabel worked like she was chasing time. She patched fences that didn't need patching. She turned the soil where the corn had already sprouted. She sharpened tools with hands that couldn't keep still. Enola followed her around, quiet, watchful. At sundown, the girl finally asked, "Do you want him to come back?" Mabel kept her eyes on the horizon. "I don't know what I want. I know what I need, and that's different. Do you still love him?" Mabel paused. "I don't even know who he is anymore. But he's my father." "Yes," Mabel said softly, "and he always will be. But that doesn't mean he gets to rewrite the story just because he shows up at the end." That night, Jonas stood by the barn watching the stars. Mabel approached quietly, arms folded. "He left us, Mabel," he said before she could speak. "Left you in the dark. Left her wondering." "I know. And I stepped in when he wouldn't. I didn't ask for anything. I just Stayed. She nodded. You did. He turned to her eyes sharp with something unspoken. So where does that leave me now that he's riding back into the story? Mabel met his gaze. Right where you've always been. With me. Jonas searched her face. Then why does it feel like I'm about to lose? You're not, she said. But I need to know what kind of storm is coming before I decide where to build the shelter. 2 days passed. The sky grew restless. Wind tugged at the windows. The kind of weather that felt like it carried something inside its secrets, maybe. Or reckonings. Enola stayed close, unusually quiet. She kept asking questions with her eyes, but never her mouth. On the morning of the 3rd day, Mabel dressed in her father's old coat, the one he wore when facing hard truths. She waited on the porch, shotgun leaning beside the door, not as a threat, but as history. Jonas stood beside her. You sure about this? He asked. No, she said. But I'm not hiding either. The sound of hooves came just before noon. Caleb appeared like a mirage on the trail, his figure hazy in the heat. He rode the same horse he'd left with. The saddle, older leather, cracked. His hat sat low, beard longer, face more weathered than she remembered. He dismounted slowly. Didn't smile. Didn't speak. Enola stood behind the screen door, eyes wide. Mabel stepped forward. Hello, Caleb. He nodded. Mabel. You're late. He smirked faintly. Never was good with clocks. Jonas stood with his arms crossed, unmoving. Caleb glanced at him, then looked back at Mabel. I came to talk. Then talk. Caleb removed his hat. I was a coward. I ran because I didn't think I could face the land, the drought, the guilt, and you. She said nothing. He continued. But I've changed. I've worked freight down in Tucson, saved some money, got sober. You didn't come back for a drink, Caleb. You came back for something. His jaw tightened. I came back for her. Mabel stiffened. I want to be a father, he said. I know I missed too much, but I'm not here to steal her. I'm here to ask, to try. Mabel looked toward the door. Enola wasn't hiding. She was standing tall, arms crossed like her mother. She's not a prize, Mabel said. She's a person. I know. Then let her decide. Caleb hesitated. Would you let her? Mabel looked at him. If you can look her in the eye and tell her the truth, then yes. That night under the old oak tree, Enola and Caleb sat side by side. He told her stories, some funny, some raw. He didn't hide from his shame. He let it speak. Enola listened, never interrupting. Finally, she asked, Do you love my mom? Caleb looked stunned. I did, he said. I probably still do in that complicated way men love what they failed to protect. She stared at him. And what about Jonas? He smiled sadly. Jonas loves her better than I ever did. And he stayed. That counts more than blood. Enola stood. Then maybe it's not too late. But don't expect a parade, Papa. Just start by showing up. Later, Jonas sat on the porch. Mabel joined him, her face unreadable. Well, he asked. She's giving him a chance. Jonas nodded. You okay with that? No, he said. But I respect it. Mabel looked out over the dark fields. I've carried bitterness so long I forgot how much lighter forgiveness is. Jonas turned to her. You forgiving him, I'm forgiving myself first. He reached for her hand. You know where I stand. She laced her fingers with his. You always have. Before Caleb left the next morning, he handed Mabel a letter. It's not a plea, he said. It's a promise. If you ever need help, I'll come. No questions. She took it. You already owe more than you can pay. Then let me owe it out loud. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat to Jonas, and rode off into the morning dust. Enola watched from the window, her face calm. He'll come back, she said. Mabel looked at her. Maybe, maybe not. And then she whispered the words that had lived unspoken too long. But now he doesn't own the ending. And with those words, the story turned toward its final page. The morning broke soft and golden. Mabel stood alone in the field, her hands deep in the soil, checking the moisture. The air still held the scent of rain, though the storm had passed days ago. Beneath her feet, the earth pulsed with quiet life. Corn stalks stretched tall now. Bean vines curled upward, gentle but persistent. The squash leaves spread wide, covering the ground like protective hands. Behind her, the house breathed quietly. Enola was still asleep. Jonas had ridden into town for supplies, promising to be back before sundown. For the first time in a long time, Mabel felt no urgency, no dread, no lingering ache that needed tending. Just peace. She wiped her hands on her apron and rose slowly, her bones stiff but steady. A breeze rustled the tall grass and sent a low murmur through the cottonwoods. The sky, endless and blue, looked down with the kind of hush that only comes when something is finally settled. She walked to the edge of the pasture and leaned on the fence Jonas had helped her mend. From there, she could see the creek, now flowing steady, not as wide as it once was, but enough. Enough to keep them growing. Enough to keep them here. A hawk circled overhead. Mabel followed it with her eyes until it disappeared beyond the ridge. She let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Later, as she chopped onions in the kitchen, Enola came down the stairs, barefoot, hair tangled from sleep. "Smells like Sunday," the girl said, rubbing her eyes. "Because it is Sunday," Mabel replied, sliding the onions into a pan of sizzling butter. Enola sat at the table, drawing shapes in the condensation on her glass of water. "Are we going to church?" Mabel paused at the stove. "We are," she said, "but not the way we used to." Enola blinked. "What do you mean?" "We'll walk the land. Sit by the creek. Say thanks where thanks is due." Enola tilted her head. "Just us." Mabel nodded. "Just us and whoever's listening." By midday, they'd packed bread, boiled eggs, some honey, and a blanket. They walked in silence, hand in hand, out to the grove where her father used to pray, when the fields were dying and the sky was too still. Mabel laid the blanket down beneath a wide mesquite tree and sat her legs folded under her. Enola sat beside her, quietly eating. "Do you miss him?" the girl asked suddenly. Mabel didn't have to ask who. Sometimes she said, "But more than that, I miss the idea of who he could have been." Enola thought about that. "Do you wish he stayed?" Mabel looked at her daughter, so grown now, in her gaze so aware. "I used to," she admitted. "But then I realized I stayed. You stayed. That's what matters." Enola leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "I'm glad we did." "So am I," Mabel whispered, kissing her hair. That evening, Jonas returned with the wagon half full and a satisfied grin on his face. "Got that new grinding wheel you asked about," he said, hoisting it down. Mabel wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. "That'll make the work easier." Jonas looked at her, something soft in his eyes. "Funny thing, every time I think we've done the hardest part, we find another hill to climb." "But we climb it," she said. He nodded. "Together." As they unloaded the supplies, Enola skipped between them, humming a tune that Mabel's mother used to sing during harvest. The sound of it wrapped around the house like smoke from a warm fire, ancient, steady, familiar. When the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch with mugs of coffee and leftover biscuits. The sky turned peach, then rust, then purple. Coyotes howled far off in the canyons, but the homestead stayed quiet, like it had finally made peace with the people living on it. Jonas leaned back in his chair. "You ever think about what this place will be like in 20 years?" he asked. Mabel smiled. "I try to think about what it'll be like tomorrow. That's enough for me." "But imagine it," he said. The barn painted fresh, the fence lined with sunflowers, maybe a second house out back if Enola decides to stay. Mabel looked at her daughter chasing fireflies in the yard, her laughter echoing. "She won't leave," Mabel said. "She was born of this land. It's in her bones now." Jonas reached out and took Mabel's hand. "You ever think you'd have all this?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I fought for it anyway." He gave a small nod. "You taught me something, you know." "Oh." He turned to her, eyes steady. "That survival is only the beginning. Real strength is choosing joy after." Mabel didn't respond right away. The wind picked up, brushing loose strands of hair across her face. "You think the land knows we made peace with it?" she asked. "I think the land was waiting for us to make peace with ourselves." As darkness fell, they lit lanterns and sat in the quiet. The stars came out like old friends, the kind you don't need to talk to in order to feel comforted by their presence. Enola climbed onto Mabel's lap, almost too big now, but still small enough to belong there. "Tell me a story," she said. Mabel thought for a moment. "A long time ago," she began, "there was a woman who lived on land that didn't love easy. It was dry and harsh. It burned and cracked. People said she should leave, that nothing good ever came from staying too long where nothing grew. But she stayed," Enola whispered. "Yes," Mabel said. "She stayed. And she bled and she wept and she cursed the sky more times than she could count. But then it rained. It did. And not because she begged, not because she broke, but because she believed. And that made all the difference." Enola nestled closer. "Was it you?" Mabel smiled. "Maybe." Jonas chuckled behind them. "Sure sounds familiar." The night settled around them, not as something to fear, but as something earned. Mabel watched the horizon one last time before retreating inside. The land was quiet now, not because there were no troubles left, but because they knew how to face them. She had learned something more powerful than resistance. She had learned resilience, and forgiveness, and love. Not the kind that burns hot and fast, but the kind that builds steady and hard-earned, like fence posts dug deep in desert ground. As she blew out the final lantern and crawled into bed beside Jonas, she whispered into the dark, "We didn't just survive. We returned. Returned to hope, to trust, to the land that had tested them and at last accepted them." Outside, the wind moved through the corn once more, whispering its quiet amen, and all was still.